break now to go through materials, the approval process. I will try to keep this as concise as possible. So here we go. Now, in this particular presentation, which has been rather, I'm laughing. They cut it apart. They took it apart after I left. It's not what it used to be. Anyway, so the particular objectives of this presentation are to realize that there are general approval processes for the materials and the prefabricated elements. And these are processes which have been defined in a comprehensive manner in documents dedicated to this activity. No, so that was me who actually wrote them anyway. So there are two different ones, and they define very well how to do everything. Now, recognize the existence of a list of approved suppliers. No. Recognize the existence of a list of manufacturers who have valid GTT approval for the supply of materials and prefabricated elements. I'm being very careful what I say, because if we have a company who works in the aerospace industry, and you approve the company, well, I don't know. I don't know anything about aerospace industry. I'm dealing with LNG. So we've got to be a bit more careful with how we use the words. But what is important is that there's a list of suppliers for GTT technologies. And it's important to realize that this list, there was an awful lot of work doing to get it. If you consider, if you have 15 technical specifications, all of which define a different type of material with specific characteristics which need to be acquired in relation to the technology to which it's going to be applied, then, and you give that to someone and say, go find materials which are conform with that specification, make sure it's all conform, and then you can think about using it. The headache, the panic, it's an incredible feat. I mean, you've got to realize how many companies there are, how many different products there are out there. There are thousands and thousands. So what GTT have got is a list of companies who've already demonstrated the industrial capacity and capability to produce the materials and prefabricated elements as is required for the building of the containment system in a correct manner. So just shows that when we say to a builder, you must use a company which is listed on the suppliers list, it's said for a reason. Understand the way in which quality materials and prefabricated elements are maintained. Okay, so we'll look at that a little bit in the way in which it's done. So the functional organization chart and specifications. Well, on the left-hand side, you've basically got what happens. GTT define the technology. Okay, they define the technology. From that technology, they define the specifications for the materials and the prefabricated elements in relation to the technology. So, for example, if you have a basic definition of a containment system, you have a primary membrane, a primary insulation space, a secondary membrane, a secondary insulation space. What the guys are going to say is, okay, I want a material which is both insulating and load bearing, so it can sustain the loads imposed by the cargo upon the containment system, and allow to transfer that nicely to the inner hull. So both insulating and load bearing. So immediately you're going to say, well, just keeping it simplistically, I need to check for resistance to compression, but also I need to check the thermal conductivity of the material. Okay. Then you're going to say, where is it located? Right underneath the primary barrier and very close to the inner hull. So, okay. So you're going to say, I want to test its load bearing capacity and its insulating behavior. One at about ambient near the inner hull, and one at minus 161, where it's just beneath the primary membrane. In working in this way, very quickly, And notice you're calling upon the technology. You're looking at the technology. What is the functionality of the material? Where is it located? That is going to define for you characteristics that you need to check. Then also you're going to be looking at the interfaces between adjacent materials. So a plywood bonded to a foam. When under operating conditions, if you were looking at the top layer of a Mark III panel, so you got your plywood, you got your adhesive, and then you got your primary insulation space reinforced polyethylene foam. That's going to be operating at about minus 160. So what do we know about materials? They all contract to a different degree. So already, even from the thermal aspects, you're going to have forces being generated at the interface. That has to be taken into consideration. Also, when the ship is underway, you've got the deflection, in essence, the distortion, all being imposed upon the membrane system. And specifically for the Mark III, for example, keeping that in mind, that's bonded to the inner hull. So the system itself is going to be flexing in such a way that you're going to have forces imposed upon the materials within the bulk. So that's where I draw upon with the reinforced polyethylene foam. You're going to be testing it through tensile thickness, X and Y direction, many things. You're going to actually identify that you do an awful lot of testing, going through all the different axes which are going to solicit the material. And also it's not just the pure materials, but again, as I said, it's the interface between different materials. So all of that will be brought together, and then the structural and thermal calculation department, they will define for you what we are looking for, what type of criterion are we looking for each particular type of performance that we've identified. Once you have that, you have a big list of the characteristics you want to check at the temperatures and the criteria next to them. Then, of course, you apply the IGC code, cargo compatibility, control agents compatibility, seawater compatibility. All of that is integrated into the specification. So once again, what I'm saying here is, in fact, wow, the specifications are directly related to the technology, and that's what it should be. And that is why when a builder asks which companies they can go to, it is the companies which have been listed on the suppliers list, which have shown the capability and capacity to produce the materials and or prefabricated elements in accordance with the specifications which have come directly from the technology. So just like wrapping it up there, it's by using those materials and prefabricated elements which have been approved based on those specifications that you can ensure impartial, because obviously you have the way in which you put them together on board, the final performance of the containment system, okay, after you've actually built it. So all that to say, to ensure the consistency between the technology concept and the realization. And we can see that in the actual building, we have the suppliers, we have the shipyard. So we have material supply, prefabricant supply, and actually the erection on board, putting it all together, the bits and pieces, putting it all together. So at each level, we have documentation. We have material quality documentation. We have prefabrication quality documentation. It is very important that we provide the indicative tools necessary to the builders to ensure that they have the right materials, that they has the right quality that we're looking for, the right performance we're looking for. And that by bringing it and putting it together correctly on board, we can ensure of the end performance of the containment system. So on board, that's where you have the GT recommendations or the erection handbook, the bonding handbook, and the welding handbook. And all of this is overviewed by the class. You know, the class, they are basically the class is certifying the vessel. The containment system, which is part of the vessel as such, is reviewed by the class, approved by the class. The materials and prefabricated elements which are used to build the containment system are also overviewed by the class. They have their approvals of the materials and prefabricated elements produced by the chosen suppliers. Now, what is important to say here is, please note, GTT, suppliers, shipyard, class. You can also add owner here. Okay, everyone is playing a role. Everyone is playing an important role to ensure that the end product, when it's delivered, will perform as it should do. So some typical prefabricated elements. They've concentrated on the MARC technology here. I'll just check again because I'm always a bit of a pity there that they've only done the Mark III. I would have preferred if they added, yeah, they only added the Mark III. So the Mark III, you've got your flat wall panel, you've got your corner panels, and you remember the corner panels, that's a 90 degree. You've also got a 135 degree. Then you've got your trihedrons, then you've got your top bridge pads, you've got your modular 3x1 primary corrugated membrane. You've got your angle piece, your accessories basically. Angle pieces, end cap. That's a mistake there. That's an end. Sorry. That's an end cap. You've got your 90 degree angle. You've got your 135 degree angle. You've also got a deviation element. I'll talk about those a bit more tomorrow. NO96, you have your boxes. Okay, your boxes are basically plywood, which have been cut to the required dimensions to build the box. And the box is basically stapled together, held together with the staples. And then the box is basically filled with either perlite or glass wool. As simple as that. But that's a prefabricated element. The Invar tube on NO96, that's a prefabricated element. Now you may ask yourself, hang on a minute, a prefabricated element, that would seem to say it's an element which has been constituted of more than one base material. Whereas the flat panel, the membrane, is one material. Yes, but the stainless steel flat membrane sheet has been transformed into a three-dimensional modular element. Okay, that's the prefabrication there. Okay, it's transforming that stainless steel flat sheet into that three-dimensional modular element, which we can see. So each component type has a dedicated specification. Well, that's what I've really basically already explained, with specific performance characteristics and testing methods. Now, in terms of testing methods, in general, for materials, not so much so with the prefabricated elements, because you'll be dealing more so with the modular elements which have been already either transformed or brought together utilizing base materials. You have two basic sets. You have your inherent properties, which you'll be testing, and you'll have your technological properties, which you'll be testing. For example, an adhesive shearing test, tensile test, whereby you're doing the test or lap shear, whereby you're testing the product itself. Okay, it's a known material, and adhesive is known. Therefore, you have international standards. So when you do the testing or inherent testing, it's following international or national standards. Okay, it's known. Whereby you're doing technological tests, these are methods which have otherwise been developed by GTT, reviewed and discussed with the class, and only applied once the class and GTT are in agreement that the test method proposed is adapted and is well capable of testing and making sure that the material to be used is performing as it should do for integration into the containment system. Then level 1 or level 2 classification is assigned. This is very simplistic, actually. I keep it simple here. If you consider the Mark III, we'll consider the Mark III for the moment, and you have a mastic, the functionality, again, that word, the functionality of the mastic is to bond and maintain the insulation to the inner hull, but also it's there to transfer the loads that we impose upon the system to the inner hull. So if anything was to happen to the mastic, that's going to have an impact upon the overall performance of the system in one way or another. So that's a level one. And level one materials and all prefabricated elements are tested and or tested under GTT supervision for approval. Level two, if we consider NO96, although we haven't said it yet, but in NO96, you have a kraft paper. The kraft paper is used to stop the load-bearing mastic used underneath the boxes, which the load-bearing mastic there is to bear the loads imposed upon the system, whereas the kraft paper is to stop that mastic from bonding to the inner hull. Why? Because you want to have that flexibility of the box in relation to the inner hull when it deforms. So if the kraft paper ripped, it has absolutely no impact upon the overall performance of the system. So it's a level two. In fact, if you go through all the materials and you look at them carefully, you can define the classification for each of them. So whereby it's a level two classification, this material or prefabricated element can be produced and tested by the maker. However, that being said, to remain aligned with the general approach of the class, what GTT say to the manufacturers today is get it tested by an independent third-party accredited laboratory. In doing so, the class and GTT can quite happily accept the data. Otherwise, GTT reserve the right to attend the production, which is going to be the production for approval, and they can also decide to perform the tests on the material themselves. Level one is it's testing done by GTT or under GTT supervision. And of course, now that we understood where the specifications come from in relation to the technology, we can understand why they are to be used for construction purposes only after they've been tested and approved based on those specifications. So, two specifications. This is for the shipbuilding. M3000 is for materials and M3100 is for the prefabricated elements. Once again, these are both being written. They give a comprehensive description in the way in which the approval is performed, but also in what way we follow up with the makers after approval and they're in mass production. So 3 steps: supplier company assessment, supplier company approval, component approval, sorry, and supplier mass production follow-up. First thing is the company assessment. Now, this has got nothing to do with the component that they will produce, okay? It's purely working and looking at the manufacturer. So how do things start off? Well, basically, the first thing is that GTT will be contacted. I'm not going to give you all the different options available. We're going to stay on a simple scenario. Is we have a manufacturer and he's interested because he's seen there's lots of volume in the domain and he wants to get involved. We'll leave it at that scenario. So the first thing he's going to do is say, well, look, I'm contacting GTT. I'm very interested in becoming a manufacturer, supplier of this particular product. What do I have to do? Well, the first thing we will do is sign a bilateral non-disclosure agreement. We remind ourselves is that GTT are going to be providing to them the specifications, which are part of the technology. But that manufacturer also will be opening up their doors to let our people go in, GTT people go in, and basically audit and see everything. So it's very important that both companies protect themselves. Well, after signing, GTT will then provide them with the materials and or prefabrication specifications. Obviously, the company is going to need those to study. And also a supplier feasibility commitment document. The idea at this stage here is to provide the manufacturer with enough information for them to self-evaluate the cost related to them being ready to become a manufacturer. So if it was a chemical company and they were looking at producing a mastic, well, the investment will be rather minimum because they already have the facilities to produce the mastic. If we were looking at a insulation panel manufacturer or a membrane manufacturer, it's a whole new ball game. It's a completely different ball game because these are components which are specific to GTT. And so they will need dedicated tools and equipment. They will need dedicated warehousing. They will need a dedicated system altogether. And for the insulation panels and the membrane facilities, GTT actually have a document which lists everything which is required. In fact, all the different types of presses, tools, equipment, the typical types of training, the warehouse footprint, facility footprint for a given production. The idea is to assist them to make this particular study, this self-evaluation they have to perform as quickly as possible. They will then now, for IP and membrane, I think the typical price is between 3 to 5 million euros. 3 to 5 million euros to be in a position to ask to get GTT approval. Now, 3 to 5 million euros is quite a lot of money. And so that's why there's a necessity for the company, with all the information we provide them, because we'll also provide them with marketing information in terms of what's the potential market they could obtain. Because it's important to them to say, okay, if I'm spending 3 to 5 million, when will I get a contract? When will I get my money back through those contracts? Those are questions which these top management of these companies are going to be asking themselves. And that's why they will perform an FID. And after they've made their FID, they will decide whether they want to go forwards or not. If they want to go forward, then we do the global company assessment, which involves very much these items here. What is important here is that the GTT auditor, he evaluates how the company works. What are the common working practices in place? What are the common standards which they're using? Are they abiding to those standards? Really seeing how the company works. Because if you go to see a car manufacturer who builds specific parts for automobile business, or you go to someone who's already in the aerospace industry, you will see very quickly the way in which they work and how they abide to the requirements already in place with regards to the standards being used. And from that, you'll know very quickly how they will work for you. So it's really getting a global overview of the company. And then there will be a report which will be issued at the end. And in that report, we will indicate, there will be an indication as to a rating of A, B, C, or D. A, B, and C, you'll have a certain degree of comments, which will help to identify the delta between what they do and what we want. And they will be given something like 3 weeks to provide a feedback into what they've done or what they are going to do with a given schedule in order to meet those comments. If it's a D, it's a thank you, but no thank you. You're nowhere near what we're looking for. We do not wish to be working with you in the future. It's very good. It's very good. That way we can be sure is that the companies which are listed on the suppliers list have what it takes industrially to produce the materials and prefabricate elements for the builders. Satisfactory rating. Basically, we have a contractual document, which is then signed between GTT and them, which is a material suppliers framework agreement or a prefabricated suppliers framework agreement. And then once that's signed, then we continue and we move forwards. Then we look at the actual component approval. Now, in the past, I had the materials and the prefabrication approvals separate. And we decided, okay, we'll mix them and just have a general approach would be largely sufficient for this type of course. So first of all, the company's already got the specifications in their possession. So these guys are going to be performing the in-house testing, developing, and once they're ready, once they think they've got something which meets the mark, they will contact GTT. And they will provide GTT with their test results and also the fabrication manual and the quality manual. And inside GTT, they got I would say you got two basic types of teams. You've got the technical guys, and then you've got the certified auditors. The certified auditors will concentrate on the documentation, the manuals, and the technical guys will be looking more so at the test reports. If everybody's happy and everyone has confidence that the product which is being proposed will meet the criterion, then a work order is signed and a component a component approval schedule is agreed upon. The work order will define how much the approval will cost and what services GTT will provide during that approval. And then once the component approval schedule is defined, that will be shared with the classification societies. It's important the class are involved at this stage. Once we're moving forwards, we will basically encourage the manufacturer contact the class. They might say, which class? So I say, well, look, who are you going to work for? They might say Samsung. I say, okay, ask Samsung which class they're working for with their current projects and their future projects. And then you need to contact those class. So we'll get the class involved as soon as possible so that they can participate to the approval process. An industrial production, it's important that there's an industrial production on scale 1 which is done, irrespective of the level of classification. And it's from that industrial production that samples are taken and are tested in accordance with the specifications. All being well, then after that industrial production, I should actually say that for level 1, our auditors, the certified auditors, will be present. Okay, the certified auditors will travel, and they will be present during that industrial production from which the samples will be taken. If all goes well, an approval report will be issued, which is basically it's a compilation of all the data results which confirm that that product has been tested in accordance with the specification and it meets the requirements of the specification. An approval file, which is only for materials. Now, an approval file is a quality control tool. It is basically a picture, if you want, a picture of the material which was approved. It will provide you with the referencing, the supply documentation in place to assure the continuity fidelity of that product during mass production. It will provide it will provide production process parameters with a range in which they must remain. And also it will give the type of quality control tests to be performed in mass production with a range to ensure that through time, the material which is produced under mass production conditions remains the same as that which was when it was first approved. So that's just for materials, okay? So you have your origin, in fact. Your approval file is the origin for quality control for the builder who's using that to check against all the materials that he's receiving. For the prefabrication, we'll get to that in a bit later on. And then, of course, you got the approval certificate. So you got these 3 documents: approval report, approval file, and approval certificate. And of course, the company's name is then added to, once they got the approval, that company is then added to the suppliers list, and the name of the company and the product for which they have approval is given in that document. And it's that suppliers list which the builders then use and refer to when identifying which suppliers they wish to have for their project. So here, approval certificate, approval file. So once again, the approval certificate for me is more the commercial document, and the approval file is a quality control tool. A suppliers list, well, what I like about this one is that the suppliers list, it's basically GTT which guarantees, okay? They don't like to say it, but that's reality. I mean, I worked on this for so many years. This list which we give to the builder, we're basically saying everybody on this list has already shown industrially the capability and capacity to produce what you need to build the systems correctly. Full stop. That's it. GTT, in essence, they're guaranteeing the companies in that list. And of course, as I said before, if they got a D rating, sorry, but no, sorry, we don't want you. We're already filtering out the weak elements. We don't want them there. We only want the good companies present to supply our customers. So the list, it provides potential suppliers for price estimation and construction. Why potential? Because you haven't chosen them yet. Simple as that. That's a bit of English there. List of choice of suppliers for each material and prefabricated element. Is always important to maintain a good, healthy environment. So a minimum, a strict minimum of 2 companies per material type. It gives good competition in terms of quality, but also in terms of cost. It's regularly updated, or at least it should do. Regularly updated at least once every 3 months, 4 months. Well, once again, all companies listed here will have demonstrated the industrial capacity and capability of producing those components in accordance with the relevant specifications. So mass production, so the builder's got the suppliers list, he makes his choice. Materials, prefabricated elements. Now here we come a little bit of difference. For specific prefabrication elements, such as the membrane, such as the Mark III insulation panel, box production, these are elements which are constituted in essence, or can be constituted, of different base materials. Okay, what do I mean by that? When a company gets the generic approval from GTT for the production of an insulation panel, it's done utilizing a specific combination of, for example, plywood, foam, adhesive, keeping it simple. For an actual project, because you've got more than one type of material for each type, you could have, for example, 3 plywoods, 3 adhesives, 3 foams. So the combination 3 times 3 times 3. It's highly improbable, and it's going to be too cost-wise and take too long to test every single combination possible. It's just not possible at the generic stage. So a generic approval is done utilizing a validated plywood, a validated adhesive, and a validated foam. And that gives you the generic approval. Okay, now it shouldn't matter if you change plywood A for plywood B. All the plywoods have been approved based on the specifications. So they're all going to perform correctly. So when it comes to a project, what they do is they have a first industrial production of a certain number and type of panels, for example, using the materials which have been specifically chosen by the owner and the builder for that project. And then the pre-production audit is performed. And during that pre-production, you've got the maker, GTT, the class, the shipyard, and the owner. Everyone's present. They're actually observing and witnessing the actual production of panels for the specific project. Okay. Now, from that pre-industrial production, well, from that pre-production audit, you've got a memorandum of meeting to which is attached all of the quality control tests, may have been visual or mechanical, during that pre-production audit. Once everyone is satisfied and signed off on that memorandum meeting, then and only then do GTT issue an approval letter specific to that project. Basically, an approval of the configuration specific to that project with the specific materials for that project. And that approval letter is only valid for the duration of that project. Now, keep that in mind, what I said there. I said inside that memorandum meeting, which is referenced on the approval letter, we have the quality control data during that pre-production audit. The materials, it doesn't change, okay? Your material, it doesn't change. It doesn't matter if you're building a Mark III in Japan, in Russia, in Korea, in China, it's the same. Fundamentally, it's the same. The materials are not changing. The specification hasn't changed. It's the same. So you can use the approval file. For the prefabricated elements which have undergone a pre-production audit, that gives you the origin for use as a comparison during mass production. And then you do your auditing during mass production of both levels of component suppliers of classification 1 and 2. And again, from which you're issuing out the reports. So project-specific prefabricated elements approval. So here we've got a supplier's issued with an approval letter dedicated to the specific shipbuilding project. So once again here, pre-production, October 7th, 2022. Production tests. Okay, so once again, it's these tests which will be referred to here for this specific membrane on the project which hasn't been given. Oh well. That'll be used as a quality control tool for the membrane. Whereas for the stainless steel sheets used for the membrane, that will have an approval file. Okay, so moving on. So we're on the last slide, in fact. So mass production and supplier product quality. So the supplier, well, obviously they have to ensure and guarantee the continuous fidelity and repeatability of the production of the component for which they have GTT approval. The clients, now the customer, they have to audit their chosen suppliers, okay? And they have to make sure the conformity of the product which has been delivered is the same as that which they have ordered. GTT, the auditors, they do an auditing which is across the board. They audit each manufacturer a minimum of once a year. They audit the manufacturers a minimum of once a year. They do not replace the builders. Okay, the builders, they have their own QM. Okay, they have their own QC teams. They need to be auditing their chosen suppliers. Now, we did identify in the past when I first joined GTT, quite quickly it was made quite evident that even after discussing with some of the guys from the shipyards, they didn't have enough personnel. You consider how big the yard is, you consider how many ships they're building, how many tanks are being built in parallel, how many different manufacturers are being called upon. They just didn't have enough personnel. So what we did is we improved the process in which the quality was followed up on. And it's from there actually was born the approval file, but also the approval letter to assist builder in being in a better position to actually follow through and make sure that the products that he's receiving is in conformity with that which was purchased. Well, GTT, well, there we go. GTT perform regular audits of the manufacturers. Okay. They maintain material supply related documentation up to date and can assist third parties during auditing of chosen suppliers specific to their project. So whereby where the guys are going to keep the approval files up to date, that's for sure. You may have a small, for example, when someone changes a manual verification of a material to a automatic verification, you have an impact upon the quality control documentation. The fact that you've modified the quality control documentation means it's going to have an impact upon the revision of the approval file. And so it's very important that the approval file, which GTT has, the maker has, the builder has got also, and which the owner can have, he just has to request it, is up to date and is referring to the right documentation which is being used in the production of the component. Well, GTT that can assist third parties. Well, What we mean by that is that when you're a newcomer and you go to see one of these manufacturers, there's so much to look at. There's so many things to try and evaluate. You can get lost very quickly. So with our guys, with our auditors, they know what to look for and they know what they're looking at. And so it really allows you to be far more efficient in being able to go and do a good auditing of a manufacturer, using the GTT guys' experience and knowledge first to help you get on your way. Now, I skipped the second bullet on purpose because I want to come back to that. So it says here, verifies and validates any modifications proposed by a supplier that may lead to an improvement, change in the fabrication procedure and or characteristics of an approved element. Now, basically, if you change something, or if you are going to change something, is the words I should say. If you're going to change something and it's going to have an impact upon the performance of the material or the component, then that in itself is saying, well, okay, you've changed the material, so you have to reapprove the material, full stop. Okay, when we get to that point, there's no negotiation, no discussion. Whereby they have to make a modification which may not have an impact upon the performance characteristics. Now, I'll give you the example. There is a load-bearing type of insulation foam which is utilized in between the secondary boxes of NR96. And that was being produced by a given company. And that company approached us, well, spoke to me and said, look, I'm going to have to change the pigmentation color of my product because my current supplier can no longer supply it. We're going to have to change and it's going to have an impact upon the color. Well, very simply, I say, okay, you need to write to us officially, tell us what is the modification to be made? Why does it have to be made? When is it going to be made? And above all, make sure that you contact the classification societies to make sure they're well aware of what's going on also. So, and also they were to provide testing data, for example, to demonstrate that there has been no impact upon the performance characteristics of the product. Again, GTT would double check that behind if it's a level 1. The reason for all this is that you can imagine on site building a vessel. One day you have a yellow product, the next day you have an orange product. Very quickly you're going to say, ooh, what's this orange color? I don't know what it is. I don't want it. Quarantine, which means you're going to have an impact upon the overall production schedule of the vessel. And you could actually delay the delivery. So in doing this, and once we're sure that the product is remaining conform with the specification, we've gone through everything, the class are aware, and we approve it. And we say, okay, we validate, you can start supplying the new product at this given date. GTT will inform its operation representatives on site. GTT will inform the builder. GTT will inform the class. Okay, so everyone's aware, and the builder will inform the owner so that the day that they're on site and the product changes from yellow to orange, it's okay. Everybody was aware of it. Everybody knows why it's changing color and that there's no problematic. So they can just continue with installation and construction of the containment system. And that's it. That brings me to the end of that rather short presentation, rather succinct. But I think it's all that is really required at this stage is for you guys to realize that these components were required to be approved based on specifications which come directly from, they've been created directly from the technologies. And it's only by using products which have been approved based on those specifications that you can ensure partly the end performance of the containment system once you've put it together correctly and it's in service. There we go. Any questions? Was that clear for everybody?
Wait, Philip. So yes, I have some, let's say like a practical issue.
Yep.
For example, we start new construction project, new
Yep.
LNG order. So I'm working as owner representative. So and I'm planning to do some audit of subcontractor for shipyard.
Yep.
I don't know who, for example, they produce these. Okay, let's say these angle corners.
Yep.
Corners elements, yes.
Yep.
So once I visit this factory, so they should show me this approval letter, which one they got from GTT, correct?
If it's
So for material and for
if you ask if it's an ongoing project, so you've already started, then you can actually ask the maker. You can ask the maker, please provide me with a copy of your certificates for the base materials. Also, you can ask for copies of the approval files. You can also ask for a copy of the approval letter for the project. They have everything.
Okay, if I have some doubts, can I send direct request to GTT just to confirm? Do you have these maker in your database?
You can do.
Confirm?
You can.
It's possible, yeah?
Yeah. I mean, basically, I can only say what I used to do. When I used to do it, I kept a database up to date where I had all of the approvals, all of the approval certificates, all the approval files, all of the approval letters for each project. And I kept that on a database. And that database was made available to our operations representatives on site. And at the beginning of every new project, I believe, at kickoff, our account managers would provide a copy of all of the approval certificates and all the approval files to the builder. And then obviously the approval letter for the prefabricated elements that was issued to the maker who was building the prefabricated element, and then they would then submit that to the builder then to the owner. So if you go to the maker, they've got everything. And GTT have copies of everything also.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, so if no other questions or thoughts, that brings us to, it was almost 10 past 12. Let's take an hour and 5 minutes, an hour and 5 minutes for lunch or dinner, depending where you are. And we'll come back at 12:15 on the hour. So here it's 12 o'clock, 10 past 12. So we'll come back at 1:15. Okay?
Okay.
Yeah.